Hello, everybody. We're going to talk about nutrition and hydration tonight, and hopefully answer all the questions you could possibly have about nutrition. I'm saying that a little bit sarcastic because there is so much about this topic that there is no way we're going to cover everything that you need to know about hydration nutrition in this meeting here. A couple things I want to say about it as we get going. No matter what I say on here, no matter what advice we give, or no matter what facts we share, you should not do what we talk about just because we say, hey, this is something that is a recommendation. It might not be the best recommendation for you. It'll be a good recommendation. There'll be some science behind it. There'll be some good facts there. However, one of my pet peeves is if you hear something, somebody says, hey, I eat this and then I perform well, and then you simply blindly follow that and do that same activity, that's just silly. And we talk about being smart jocks around here. That's a dumb jock decision. Okay, a smart jock would look at that information and then try to figure out how to best apply it to their world, to their situation, and what they're doing, whether that's timing of the year of their training, whether that's goals of their training, what that's, and then you got to look at your dietary needs, whether you're have any issues going on relative to some disease states, whether you have some issues going on relative to how your gut handles things, and just how you respond to foods in general. So be sure that you're making that smart jock decision as you're applying anything that we talk about here tonight. The other thing is that there is no cookie cutter plan. You hear about all these little fad opportunities, high carb, low carb, and I'm not going to name some of the others out there, but there's names of people who are people and brands who are doing things, and they sell them as this is the best way to lose weight, to gain fitness, to you fill in the blank. I'm a believer that you need to have a well-rounded, balanced diet. You need to have plenty of your macros, and we'll learn more about those here in a little bit. You need, which are your carbs, proteins, and fats. You need to make sure that you have your micronutrients, which are your vitamins and minerals and some of the trace elements. You need to make sure that your electrolytes, which are part of those micronutrients, are at the levels that they need to be, either in your training or in your daily activities. And then you need to put that all into context with what's your health like? What is your age? What is your fitness level, and how those things apply? Okay, so that's my waiver information, if you will, or some cautions as you listen to the rest of this nutrition and hydration conversation. So let's get into what are we really talking about? We're talking about food, right? We're talking about getting the right nutrients. We're talking about getting the right quantity of food, if you will, into your body. So the macronutrients that we're going to talk about, there's carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. And they're usually put in that order, carbs, proteins, fats, because your body relies on carbohydrates a lot to do things. It's energy, it's sugar in general. You've got simple sugars, complex sugars, that your body uses those to get your muscles to work and to build and grow and that sort of thing. So energy, your brain uses those, your nerves use carbs a lot. So here's part of my bias. When you go on a really low carb diet, you're depleting your body of some essential macronutrients, those carbohydrates that your body needs to function. Okay, there's always a balance. There's always a balance. Proteins, that for the most part, that's what's going to make up your muscle building. It's going to be the building blocks. You've got amino acids and essentials and non-essentials and all those sort of things that go together to get this. And some of the pieces of information that we talk about between carbohydrates and fats, if you have carbohydrates, I eat some bread and it goes to my hips, or I eat some bread and I gain weight. You have some protein and sometimes you don't do those sort of things. And so that's why sometimes having a high protein diet or a low carb diet, you see people lose weight because of those factors that happen relative to carbs and proteins. But again, we're talking about athletic activity. You can't exclude either of those, and they got to be in the right quantities for what you're doing relative to your body. The third part of the macronutrients is fats. And people think that fats are bad. No, fats are not bad. Fats are essential. Now, there are some things called essential fats. Fats are important to how your body works. And again, when you exclude or eliminate one of those macronutrients or don't have it in the right ratio, your body's not going to perform as well as it could. Okay, so macronutrients, carbohydrates, proteins, fats, we need all of those. We need them in the right proportion. Sometimes that'll vary what the percentages are. We will talk about that in more depth coming up. But I would encourage all of you not to go to an exclusive side one way or the other. Okay, again, that's my bias. Then we're going to talk about some micronutrients. This is your vitamins and minerals. We're going to lump electrolytes inside of that area, more so on the mineral side, obviously. But things that are required for you. What are these? So the vitamins that we really care about, that we're going to pay a lot of attention to, is vitamin A, D, C, E, and K. Now, I skipped over B because there's several B vitamins that we really care about. There's up to 12 different B vitamins. Those have different names that you may recognize them from. They don't always list them as B3 when B3 could be termed something else, riboflavin, or there's a bunch of different names. So don't get bogged down in some of that complicated piece, but there are multiple B vitamins. Vitamin A, D, C, E, and K are the ones that we really pay attention to when it comes to your health and performance. The minerals that we really want to talk about is iron, calcium, magnesium, calcium. We want to talk about sodium and potassium. We talk about those quite a bit. But those, you have to have the right amounts for those. And each of those, if you have deficiencies, your body's not going to perform as well as it could. Sometimes, you've applied some Captain Obvious things. If you don't have enough sodium, you get some cramping, or you get some muscle fatigue that happens because of that. You have low iron, you have anemia, and you have other issues. You have low calcium, low vitamin D. You have some less strong bones. You have some disease states that go along with deficiencies with all of those. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. We're talking about macronutrients, and we're talking about micronutrients, and all of those need to be in balance relative to what you are. You can go online and you can type in USRDA, or recommended daily allowances for men and women at different ages, and what should be the micronutrients that you should be getting in on a daily basis, and those are listed. If you look at any label and they list these vitamins and minerals, they'll tell you how much is in that for a serving, and what percentage of that USRDA is listed there. So a lot of times you can get information off the labels of, is it a high calcium thing? Is it a high iron issue? Is it, where are you at on those pieces? So we got some territory laid out there of what we're really talking about. Okay, now let's get into how much should you take in? What should be your quantities, or how do we figure out what to do? So let's just talk about on a daily basis of what would be a good estimation of where you want to be. Okay, so to really understand this, we got to talk about calories. Okay, 1 gram of carbohydrate is 4 calories. 1 gram of protein is 4 calories. 1 gram of fat is 9 calories. Okay, so if you have a high fat diet, you're in essence going to be consuming more calories per gram, obviously, right? Almost twice that much. But if you have all those in the right caloric number, let's say it's a 2,000 calorie diet, and the ratio that you want to have of carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, you can then figure out how many grams you're going to have to make that up. Okay, so let's do some quick math, and we're going to stay generalized because I don't really care that we get that deep into this. But if you've got 4 calories per gram of carbohydrates and proteins, and 9 calories per gram of fat, you can back your way out of trying to figure out how many grams of each you need to have relative to the percentage of your diet that you want carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. Okay, a couple ways of working your way into that. You can work backwards, like what we talked about. You can look at, there's some recommendations out there of how many calories per body weight per pound are you, of offering recommendations. Sometimes those same studies will also put that in terms of how many grams per kilogram do you need to perform just daily activities, or then there's talk about how much do you need to have when you're working out, and then you got to grade that intensity. How hard are you working out? The harder you work out, the more calories you burn, the more calories you're going to need to replace. And that, okay. So let's dive in a little bit. So let's talk about daily activities. If you're going to just kind of hang out and you're going to lay on the couch. And again, these are generalizations. These are not specific numbers for you to look to copy and just arbitrarily go do this. But these are generalizations, right? So if you're going to just hang out, it's going to be a rest day. There's no training. Having 12 to 15 calories per pound of your body weight would be recommended bring in that day. Okay, so let's do easy math. 200 pounds, and we want to bring in 15 calories per pound. Well, then I'm going to have what is that? I think that's 3,000. 15 times 200, is that 3,000? I think that's 3,000. So for me, that would be what I would be bringing in if I'm training, if I'm doing those sort of things. If I'm on the lighter side, it depends on what my metabolism is. Maybe I want to be on the lower end of that scale, closer to the 12. Sometimes, again, these are generalizations. We may want to look at 10. Okay, if it's 10 calories per pound of body weight, now I'm looking at a 2,000 calorie diet. Okay, so again, it's a generalization. It's a way to work your way into that number. Now, there are tests out there. We have an in-body body composition here that'll give you your resting metabolism. That will tell you an approximate number by what you do relative to your body composition. There are other tests out there that you can have your body analyzed, and it will give you a generalization of what your BMR or basal metabolic rate is. But those are two different ways right now of trying to calculate what your base calorie need is. Okay. Now, when you increase the activity, when you bump up the calories that you would be bringing in relative to an activity, well, then that 12 to 15 now might bump up to 15 to 18, because now we've added some activity. If we're going to go longer, if we're going to go incrementally longer, might bump up to as much as 22, 23 kilocalories per pound of body weight. If you're going to do a really long course or ultra distance triathlon where you're obviously out there 6 to 14 hours, well, you might be up at 30 plus calories per pound of body weight. Again, some of that is generalizations to help you get to the right number of calories to perform and then recover and be able to maintain what your body systems need. But again, these are things that we would want to work toward, experiment with in your training to see how your body comes before you get to those long different activities. Okay. So now we're going to shift gears a little bit. We were talking about calories per pound of body weight. Let's now put that in terms of grams. Some of you, can look at the labels and how many grams of carbohydrates you're getting in, and let's talk about that. So now we're going to talk about how many grams per pound of body weight for those same sort of things. So if we've got an activity that's up to 90 minutes, so we're talking about our sprint distance and 10Ks and 5Ks and those sort of things, depending on what's going on, you might bring in between 2 and 3 grams per kilogram body weight. Okay. So now for easy math, let's change my weight. Now I'm 220 pounds. 1 kilogram is 2.2 pounds. Okay. So that's why it changes. So 220 pounds would give me 100 kilograms. Okay. So if I am trying to bring in 2 to 3 grams of whatever it is per kilogram, 2 to 3 times 100 means that I need to bring in 2 to 300 grams of whatever that is that I'm trying to bring in. And then right now we're talking about carbohydrates. Okay. So on the carbohydrates, we've looked at that you can have, we talked about total diet, where we've looked at the between 12 and 30 plus, depending on how long you're going, number of calories per pound body weight of total caloric intake. Now we've shifted into carbohydrates, and we're talking about grams per kilogram. Okay. So we're looking at, again, between 2 and 3 grams per kilogram body weight of what we would need to bring in if we're doing some sort of activity. Okay. The longer that goes, we might be bringing in, now, if we're going longer than 90 minutes, we might be bringing in 3.5 to up to 4.5 grams. If we're going 3-4 hours on an activity, we might be bringing in 4.5, 5, 5.5, 6, depending on, what our stomachs can tolerate, what we can tolerate, and how things are working there. Okay, shifting gears a little bit relative to proteins, and I want you to see this for a second, because when we're talking about carbohydrates, we were talking about in general, and again, this is generalizations. We're talking between 2 and 6 grams per kilogram body weight. As we shift to proteins, now we're talking about 0.5 grams per kilogram. We're talking about those 3+ hours, upwards of like 0.9 if we're really going to be aggressive on that piece. Part of that is that we don't need as much protein while we're doing the activity, because we need more carbs. That's going to be more readily available that the muscle is going to use, that our body's going to use to help us go, okay, to help us move through that performance. Okay. I hope that's making sense so far, but we're talking about different percentages of what your overall caloric needs could be, should be, and then we've broken that down into the proteins and the carbohydrates of how much that you could be bringing in, should be bringing in relative to your size and relative to different distances, okay, different durations, I guess. So real quick going back and hammering that point home, if we're talking about grams of carbohydrates per body weight, we're talking about 2 to 6, depending on how long the duration is. Under 90 minutes, you need closer to 2 to 3. If you've got something that's going 90 minutes but it's really high intensity and maybe up to 2 hours, now we might be bringing in 3 to 4, 3 and 0.25 in that area. Anything that's longer than 3 and we've got a moderate intensity, we're bumping that up into the 4.5, 5, 5.5, whatever we can tolerate. And you can train your gut to be able to tolerate more, to be able to burn more, to be able to bring in more calories, be able to convert those to energy, and then be able to use it. If you have a quick spike, just like in your training, if you go from a low level intensity to a high level intensity, or a short duration to a longer duration, you're going to eventually have some sort of issue going on, right? I mean, it may not go well that particular day, but if you gradually increase the amount that your body can digest, and your body can get trained, become more efficient to do that digestion, you'll be able to bring in more calories and have a less odds of a gut reaction relative to that. Okay. As we're talking about calories per day and how much you're bringing in, one of the things that I see is a lot of people make an error in their judgment. And I mean, what I mean is they think they are eating more or less than what they really are. They think they're having a more balanced diet than what they really are. They have a perception that, hey, I eat well, or I eat the right amount, I don't overeat, I don't do this. The only way you're truly going to know is to analyze it, to look at it, to track it, to write it down, to have somebody review that with you. There's a couple things out there that I really like that are very helpful. One is I tell people that MyFitnessPal is a great app that, there's a free version, and then obviously there's a paid version with it as well. But it's very quick, easy, that you can input food. You can start typing whatever it is. I mean, you can type in a restaurant and their menu will come up, and McDonald's cheeseburger, and McDonald's cheeseburger will come up with a lot of different options, and it'll automatically have all the macro and micronutrients that are in that already there for you inside of the MyFitnessPal. And if you just track what whatever you're eating, whatever you're ingesting, It'll give you totals for the day. It'll tell you what the percentages are of each of those. You don't need to change anything at this point. You're just trying to track what you're doing and see how close what you're really doing looks like what you think you are really doing. If you think that you're having a low carb diet, but yet when you do this, your percentage of carbohydrates is 60%, you're not having a low carb diet. A lot of people, when I have them do this, they think they're getting in more protein than what they really are. And, they start tracking and they realize that they're only getting a small percentage of the protein that they need to have. So again, as you're looking at doing this, where are you at would be the first place I'd ask you to stop and look. What is your true caloric intake? How many calories are you getting? And then what percentage are those? Okay. And then you can compare that to some of the stuff we've chit-chatted about. How many calories are you bringing in? How many calories should you be bringing in? Once you've got that data, once you've got that information, that perspective, then we can start talking about, do we need to change something? We can start correlating how that has affected your performance or how it is affecting your performance. Everything that you ingest into your body, you are fueling this engine. You are fueling your body to work, and it's either going to be good fuel or it's going to be not good fuel. It's either going to have a positive effect or it's going to just have no effect or possibly even a negative effect. So that would be the first place I'd want anybody to start looking before they really start applying any of the stuff we talked about. Okay. I don't want you to go, hey, I weighed this amount, so I should be bringing in this number of grams or this number of calories. That would be a risky, poor choice for you to do without knowing where you're at in that moment. Okay. So from here, I want to talk about training. In your training, when should you eat? How should you eat? What should that look like? What are some good recommendations to do with that? Okay. So before training, your pregame meal, your pre-event meal, your breakfast, whatever happens to be, you should be fueling to do whatever activity you're doing for that day, right? So if we used just a regular training day and you knew that you were getting up first thing in the morning to go swim, run, or bike, do a strength workout, do whatever, should you go into that hungry? Okay. Should you go into that fasted? Should you go into that with some food in your belly? I'd say depending on what you're trying to accomplish, the answer is yes to all three of those. Okay. There's some good research out there that talks about, fasting and intermittent fasting and that side of the world in terms of what it does to your body. And so having some of that, exploring some of that might not be a bad idea. If you're trying to have a really big performance in that workout, whatever you're doing, it's probably not a good idea to go into it fasted. You need the fuel to get there. And so then we would start talking about a pre-event meal, a pre-race fueling of some sort. So we're going to assume that we're going to do some fueling. So what should that look like? Okay. Pre-event meals are generally 1 to 4 hours prior to the activity. Right. So you need some time that if you're going to put all this food in your belly, all this solid food, it needs time to digest and actually get to the tissues that are going to be using it. Depending on how fast you digest food, depending on what types of food you put in, they all digest at different rates. You're going to need between 1 and 4 hours, right? So if you have a steak, I'm just going to make that. If you have a steak as your pre-game meal, it's going to take a lot longer for that to digest than if you had some sort of shake or something less dense, if you will. Not caloric dense, just dense in terms of digestibility. Okay, so there's some thought process of what you're going to eat relative to how far away from your event that you're going to eat it. Okay, and again, there's some experimenting with that. How fast does your body digest food? How fast does your body digest this food and prepare you for an activity? The other thing that goes with that is, sometimes you put something in your belly and this doesn't settle well. You just don't perform well. You get an upset stomach or you have something going on. So again, you want to experiment with the foods that you think you're going to use pre-event, so you know what's going to happen pre-event. Okay. So again, those are 1 to 4 hours prior. Most of the time it's going to be between 300 and 700 calories, depending on your size, depending on what's going on. As a general rule, if you relative to your body weight, if you bring in 0.5 grams per pound of body weight per hour away from it, right? So if we're 1 hour away and I weigh 200 pounds and I bring 0.5 grams in, that means I'm bringing in 100 grams of carbohydrates an hour before. Okay. If I'm going to eat 2 hours before, now that number would be 200 grams. It would be 2 hours away from it. So it's 0.5 times my weight times 2 hours away from the event. So now I'd be bringing in closer to 200 grams. Okay. Quick quiz for you. 200 grams is how many calories? 4 calories per gram. So it would be 800 calories. Can your body digest 800 calories in 2 hours? Again, that really depends on you. You've got to, experiment into that side. But again, you can practice. You can see what your sweet spot is in terms of digestibility, how many calories it is, how fueled you are. The overall goal of eating beforehand is just to top off your tank. Make sure you have enough energy to do whatever you're going to do. If it's a shorter workout, you don't need as much. If it's a longer workout, you're going to need a little bit more. What does your belly tolerate? All those things should go into that aspect. Other things to consider, the more fiber that you have in that pre-event meal, it's going to come out someplace, okay? And it's going to come out as a solid. And so if you have issues with GI, or if you're set up with that, you want to have less fiber in that pre-event meal because you're going to have to deal with it. If you don't have any of those issues, you can experiment and you can see what's going to happen relative to that amount of fiber, right? So, yeah, I know. One of those great conversations that we get to have about fiber and solids coming out of your body. But it's important. You don't want to get on an event and you're going, and now all of a sudden you got to stop and you have a break, and now you're not impressed by your time, and you can tell everybody you had some GI issues and could have been possibly prevented by the amount of fiber that you brought in. Okay. During training, you don't need a lot of protein, but if you have a longer event, you might want to consider bringing protein. And so we're going to not talk about proteins because most of our events, we don't really need to bring in protein during the activity. Okay. Now, if you're doing a full iron, if you're doing something of that distance, trail running, the ultra distances and that sort of thing, well, we'll talk about getting some protein because you need to have some sustainability with that stuff. But for the most part, we can get by with just having carbohydrates during our activity. And so I'm going to limit it to that conversation during the training, during the event, of just having carbohydrates. Most recommendations out there tell you to bring in between 35 and 70 grams per hour, not per body weight, 30 to 75 grams per hour of activity. Okay. Now, if you're doing a 1 hour activity, I'm going to tell you don't need to bring much in at all. Get in, get out, get through it. You're looking at something over an hour. This is when that starts to happen. If I brought in 75 grams, I'd be fine for a couple of hours, but then my body is burning a lot more than that. And I know for me, I'm over 100 grams per hour of what I bring in. Now, could I have done that several years ago? No, my belly would not have tolerated. I wouldn't be able to do those pieces. But I've learned that I need more calories. I need more grams of carbohydrate every hour. And I've gradually worked that way up. So if you're just getting started with this, start with 30, start with 50 grams an hour and kind of see how you tolerate that. 1 or 2 hours, you can tolerate pretty much anything. But if you have your longer bike rides, your longer runs, you're bringing this in, see what happens as you're able to increase that carbohydrate intake, the number of grams. So I'm going to use mine. I'm going to use mine. Let's say I'm trying to bring in 100 grams of carbohydrates an hour. Do I bring in every time the clock strikes another hour? Do I bring in 100 grams all at once? That would be silly. I'm not burning all these calories all at once. I'm not, so I need to replenish them more gradually. The other thing that does is that lets my gut, who now doesn't have as much blood flow because all the blood's in my extremities, working hard, really hard to keep my muscles going. I don't have as much blood flow going to my gut to do digestion that I would just if I was sitting around having after I've had a big meal. I've got to gradually let that stuff trickle in. I've got to, allow that digestion to happen on a more gradually. So that 100 grams, I would divide it. I like 15. Every 15 minutes, I'm taking in some carbs, right? So for me, every 15 minutes, be 4 cycles of that. 100 divided by 4 is every 15 minutes, I'm bringing in 25 grams of carbohydrate of some sort. I can do that as a liquid. I can do that as a gel. I can do that as a food source, depending on what I want to do. There's some practicality of what do the aid stations offer? What am I able to carry? What kind of things can my stomach tolerate? How much can I carry if I'm carrying stuff? All those things would go into that consideration. Okay. Other people, and again, I'm using the 15 minutes. I've got other people who will use every 20 minutes. So now it's just 3 times. I've got others that are on the half hour. If we're doing some sort of running, you can use your pacing, depending on when you're going to get to an aid station, depending on what your timing is going to be. If you're running an aid station, it's usually about every mile. If you're at a 10-minute pace, that every aid station, you're going to be able to grab something. You don't need to carry. So every 10 minutes might be that decision. Or maybe you don't want to do the same thing at every aid station. So you go every other aid station, but you're grabbing something at each aid station. So one aid station, you might grab more water. Another one, you might grab more sodium. Another one, you might grab more carbohydrates. You can have any combination of that. As long as you're getting the total quantity of all the things that you need within that hour. Okay. So if you were stopping every 10 minutes, if you're getting an aid station every 10 minutes and your caloric intake was 100, well, now it would be 100 divided by 6, and that's just a tougher number. If it's you're going to bring in your carbs every other aid station, well, now that's 3 because you're going to get you an aid station every 10 minutes. So every 2 miles, you're going to bring in 30 grams or 33 grams of carbohydrates to get to your 100. So again, there's a lot of different options, a lot of different ways that you can do the same thing, but what's best relative to your thought process, what's best relative to how your body works, and how have you been training it during your training? What's been your routine to do these sort of things? Okay, so we've talked about the caloric intake during the workouts. Let's pull back a little bit and let's talk about sodium and water. And we're going to talk about them kind of together. Okay, and I'm going to do that for a couple of different reasons. One is that the solution, the quantity of sodium relative to the amount of water, that ratio is important. Okay, so you can see this real quick. I've got water over here. Water volume is this level, and my concentration level of sodium's here. Okay, if I don't bring in enough water, right, but I've got the same amount of sodium, that ratio's off. It's more concentrated here. Let's say that I bring in more water than normal, but I stay at the same sodium level. Now that concentration is more dilute. Okay, having a concentration that's either too dense or too dilute will give you problems. And you can do that either by adjusting the water up and down, not at the right spot, or you can do it by having the right water, but not enough sodium or too much sodium, and you get those concentrations off. So the ratio of the water and the sodium becomes important. That's why we're going to talk about these together. Okay, so this is really talking about sweat rate. How much water do you lose per hour? Okay, it's really easy to figure out. It's really easy to figure out. Go jump on a scale, take off your clothes, get a base weight. Okay, you've gone to the bathroom, you've gotten rid of everything, you get a base weight. Get dressed, Yeah. Now go do an hour workout. Don't take anything in. Don't eat. I don't care if you get calories, but don't put any water in your body, and go have a workout for that hour. Okay. Towel off, wipe all the sweat off of you, take all that sweaty clothes off, go get on the same scale. Okay. Reweigh. Whatever you lost, okay, whatever poundage you lost, multiply that by 16 ounces in a pound. That'll tell you what your sweat rate is. How many ounces of water do you need to bring in per hour? Okay, it's real simple. If you if you weighed in at 200, you go do a workout, you lost 4 pounds, you come back in at 196. 4 times 16 is, was that 64? I hope that's close. Otherwise, I'm gonna get made fun of. 16 times 2 is 32. Yeah, 64. So that would be a 64 ounces of water per hour. That's hard to do. Okay, but again, you divide it up. If you're running and you need to get 64 ounces every hour, and you stop at an aid station every 10 minutes, 6 divided by 64 would mean that you're getting basically about 11 ounces every aid station. And so in those cups that they would give you, the cup is 8 ounces. They're usually half full. You'd be grabbing 3 of those. 10 to 12 ounces at every aid station, 6 times. You're getting into the right quantity. I know it sounds hard, doesn't it? In your training and your running, if you find out that that's your sweat rate of 64, and you're only taking in 32, and you're not training, you got to do these things, and you get to race day, and then you go, I'm gonna follow this plan now. Do you think your body's going to do well with that? It'd be just like if you were trying to do a long distance event, but you haven't run past 10 miles and you're trying to do 26. Your body's not going to do well with that. Okay, so this nutrition and planning and having this number becomes an important thing. Okay, now how do we figure out how much sodium you got to bring in? How do we get the concentration there? There are a couple things out there. I'm going to talk about 2 of them that I'm not super impressed by. One is Gatorade has this little patch you can put on, and it'll tell you the numbers. It's not been very, very precise. I've seen some of the studies that are not Gatorade studies, and then other anecdotal things of people using it. And it's, I'm going to say it can get you kind of close, but it's not enough that I would trust putting it together. No, I don't want all the Gatorade fans to get upset with me. I don't want any of the other pieces going on. It's just not one that I think is as reliable as some of the others out there. There's one on the market. I've got it right here. Sorry for looking away from you. Another one on the market. It's called Nix. It's essentially you'd put on your body, wear it, and it would give you, quote, a real time of what you're doing. So if you're going to put it on in your training, you go do this, and hey, here's what I typically do. They market it as doing some of this on race day. So on race day, as you're doing it, hey, I'm low on this, and you can theoretically put those into you. The problem is they don't give it very precise. They just say electrolytes. And are we talking about sodium electrolytes? Are we talking about the potassium? What are we really talking about? They just group all together. So again, I'm not anti either of those. I am not anti either of those. I just don't think they're as precise as some other ones out there. The one that I like a lot is one of the tests that we do here. Obviously, I'm biased because we do it here, but it's called leveling. And we'll put that on. You go do your workout, do a workout on the bike, do a workout on the run. 2 different tests. So now you see what your sweat rate is relative to those specifically, and then you know how much sodium. When you get the report back, you'll see milligrams of sodium that you lost during that time, or the concentration of that water at that time, and it's not always the same on the bike and the run. So it's important to do what I would say 2 different tests, or a multi-sport test, so you can see what the sweat rate and the sodium needs are on the bike and specifically on the run. I've always known that I'm a salty sweater. I get done, I've got white crusty stuff everywhere, and the kit and the uniform is all it's all white. What color is it? Got all this salty stuff on it. So I've always known I'm a really salty sweater. And early on, a decade ago, I thought I was taking in quite a bit of sodium. I was bringing in about 2,000 milligrams an hour. USDA says you need 1,500 a day. So I'm a salty sweater. That's a big number. And so I would get done with different events, and I couldn't figure out why my training wasn't good enough. I couldn't figure out why it just didn't feel that way. So I got this test. I took this test. My bike sodium numbers are 3,800 milligrams. My run is 42. So I mean, I was taking in half of what I needed per hour. If I'm doing a full iron event and I'm gonna go out there for 12, 13, 14 hours, I'm so far under that by the end it's amazing I'm still walking. Okay, and there's a lot of different examples out there of people crawling across finish lines and being heroic and going that. I'm looking at that going, man, you need some sodium, or you should drink more water, or whatever the ratio is. Some of that stuff doesn't need to happen at that same level. And I guess as I'm getting more seasoned, more veteran, some of the stuff, I look at that as just being silly and working hard and not smart. So get your number. We can get that test, or you can get that test, get those numbers, and then it's just like the calories. Once you know what your sweat rate is, how much sodium you need, you just figure out how to put it in, routinely while you're doing the pieces. And then just to kind of finish that story, as soon as I started taking the sodium at the closer to the level that I needed to get to, I do not bring in 3,800 and 4,000 milligrams an hour. I just can't digest that much. I end up with some GI issues when you do too much. And but I'm closer to 3,000. I can get into 3,200 milligrams, which is closer to what I need. As soon as I started doing that, and Terry, you'll like this one. I did Wisconsin after doing it a couple of times. And this is when I had just started adding the sodium to it. I got done with Wisconsin, got a PR, and it was the fastest I'd done that event. It was my third time, so maybe it's just experience. I get done a couple of days later, I'm like, my body is recovered a lot faster than what I expected to be. I know my body. I knew, I'd done several irons at that point. Signed up for another one that was 5 weeks later, and I went faster in the second one, not because of super training, and not because I'm heroic, not because I'm a great athlete. I was getting the right amount of sodium so my body could do and recover a lot faster. Okay, so don't take that you're going to be able to do 2 Ironman in a year. Don't take that as you get enough sodium and you can go out and do dumb crazy stuff like that. But it's an example of when you have the right amount, the right quantity, the right ratio of things. Your body is amazing. It can do a lot of great things. Okay. So what have we talked about so far? We've talked about daily requirements, macros and the micros. We've talked about carbs in general, about your training, how far away to have those. We've talked up that you've got to figure out your sweat rate, that you've got to figure out how much sodium you need to bring in. And then we've talked about how to do that consistently over each hour, bringing that same amount in each hour. You would use your aid stations, whether it's on the bike or the run. We talked about the run aid stations being every mile, and depending on what your pace is, you can calculate how many of those you're going to see per hour. On the bike, we didn't specifically talk about where they're at and so forth, but in general, they're about every 15 miles. And so if you're riding 20 miles an hour, that means every 45 minutes, you're going to get to an aid station. Okay. The good news is on the bike, you have ways to carry water. You have places in your cycling jerseys and your bento bags and all that kind of stuff that you can carry other calories and then eat during that time in between the aid stations. At the aid stations, you would refill or replenish or grab things to get those calories for the next 45 minutes if you were riding 20 miles an hour. Now, if you're riding 15 miles an hour, that means every hour you're going to get to another aid station. Okay. So you got to do some math. You got to do some prediction of what your pacing is going to be, what your intensity is going to be to get all those things ready for you. The other thing that's important or that's challenging on the bike is some of us get really nervous when we're on the bike. And so we're really grabbing onto the handlebars. We're riding. We're looking out for everybody. We're nervous by going up and down. And we don't take the time to truly get the nutrition and hydration in. So you've got to be really diligent about that. You've been practicing taking your hands off the hoods, taking your hands off the handlebars, reaching down, grabbing a water bottle, putting in it every 10 minutes, every 15 minutes, every 20 minutes, whatever your plan is, but it's got to be routine. Okay. The last thing I want to talk about is, we've talked about during your events and during training, but let's talk about times of the year for you, right? In the off season, what should you be having a different percentage of fats relative to proteins and carbs? Yes. When you're in your preseason, should that number be different? Yes. When you're in your peak season in competition, should that be different? Yes. I'm not going to get into in this place right now of what those specifics could be or what those things are, because they're going to be so individualized to you and the intensity that you're doing and what your body is going through, right? If you are injured or recovering or have difficulties with recovery, your carb percentage is going to be higher than if you're not having some of those issues, in my opinion. If you are in your off season, you don't need as many carbs because in your off season, theoretically, you're not going as intensely. Okay. So those things would come into this conversation, and talking with your coach or talking with your mirror, your reflection, or talking with a professional that does this all the time, because all the stuff that I'm talking about, you should not take as being highbrow stuff. This is going to be the basic stuff to get you into a conversation, into an area that you can dial in deeper for you. Okay. If you are having any sort of gut issue, if you have a common theme, you have GI issues on race day, but you don't have those in your training. If you have a certain amount of food coming in or some sort of disease state going on, you need to talk to a professional to get this better figured out, right? We wouldn't.
But all three of these guys came down.
We wouldn't want to get expertise off of this conversation or off of anything else that isn't specific to you if you have one of those. I guess I'm rambling about that piece, but it's important that if you have issues in your diet, don't just take this basics and run with it. If you know that you've got issues, either we need to talk in more detail about you, or we need to get you to a dietitian nutritionist that specializes in this. A couple other things to consider are supplements. If you're not getting enough protein, there are protein supplements out there. If you are having issues with energy and that kind of stuff, there's ways to buffer the acidic or lactate byproduct that working out is, and beta alanine is an opportunity. If you want to have open up your vascular system, there's things out there of nitric oxide and other supplements, everything from beets to I just lost the specific words, but there are very specific things, nitric oxide enhancers that can help with that. So there's a bunch of stuff to look at, and again, I don't want you to hear creatine and go, I need to get creatine. I don't want you to hear nitric oxide and go get nitric oxide. I don't want you to hear beta alanine and say, hey, I should be using beta alanine. Let's put that in the big picture and discuss it. But these are all things that we should be considering as you're looking at your nutrition and supplement. Okay. If you've got any questions, feel free to reach out. Reach me here at PXP Endurance. You can email me at pxpendurance.com. If you don't have my phone number to text and so forth, it's on the website, pxpendurance.com. Would love to help you figure out what is best for you and your performance. I'd love to help you work through some of these details.